Now, of course, with so much conversation taking place around Web3 and crypto and NFTs, etc., it helps a lot when you take the time to put something together that is very well thought out and written. And that is exactly what our first guest speaker has done. Ryan Selkis is the founder of Messari, a platform that provides market intelligence that drives high conviction participation in crypto. Ryan is also the author of the Crypto Thesis for 2022, an absolute must read if you have not done so already. Over several years, Ryan has been deeply involved in the cryptocurrency community, including roles at Digital Currency Group, CoinDesk, where he led the acquisition and turnaround of the Bitcoin and blockchain tech industry's top news, research, and events business. And now at his role at Messari, where they are building research tools for crypto enterprises and professionals. Joining him for what will no doubt be a phenomenal fireside chat is our very own founder and CEO of Startup Grind and Bevy, Derek Andersen. Let's give them a very, very warm welcome. Over to you, Ryan and Derek.
Awesome. Thank you, Finn. Great start to this. And welcome everyone from around the world. Grateful to have you. And Ryan, welcome to Startup Grind. I think this is your first time at Startup Grind, if I'm not mistaken. So hopefully, it's a memorable experience.
Thank you for having me. Yeah, it should be a fun conversation.
I'd love to just start. I have many questions, and I'm just going to keep reiterating this throughout the conversation. Please, to everyone listening, share your questions with Ryan in the Q&A tab, and we will get to those here in about 30 minutes. Just tell us about sort of how you got started. I know you went to Boston College. You got an MBA, which I feel like I have so many questions about that. But
I tricked you already.
But just tell us like how you got started in the world of finance and in your career.
Sure. So I went to Boston College undergrad. I graduated in the teeth of the financial crisis and was actually supposed to get into investment banking right out of school. I accepted a full-time offer after my 2007 summer internship at JP Morgan. And 3 weeks before I was supposed to start, I was on family vacation and got the call that my offer was being deferred because JP Morgan had just acquired Bear Stearns and things were kind of hitting the fan. And that was kind of the precursor to the big meltdown that fall. So fortunately, I'd signed on the spot because I was young and stupid. And even though I didn't really want to do investment banking, they floated a huge signing bonus and relocation bonus. And I figured I'd use that for play money senior year. So I never even bothered kind of interviewing at other spots that some of my friends who graduated a year or two after me before me had wanted me to come in and kind of chat with their teams. So I never kind of fired that bullet in the fall of my senior year, but I picked up the phone and I made a couple quick phone calls. Ended up getting fast tracked and very fortunate, got right into venture capital out of school at a firm called Summit Partners. So that was a pretty wild rabbit out of the hat experience during what was otherwise the worst environment for people graduating in finance. And it kind of changed the trajectory, I think, of a lot of my career. So I knew pretty quickly by the time I was 25 that I wanted to be on the other side of the table. I started my first startup, which is a long story, but the long story short is it took a year. I went through all my venture capital savings, decided to apply to business school and got in, but deferred because I was in the process of winding down the startup. And then I had 10 months on my hands where I didn't really have anything to do before I was supposed to go to MIT. Ended up falling down the Bitcoin rabbit hole because this was mid 2013. And within a matter of weeks, decided I wasn't going to be going to business school after all, and took my 401k, sold everything in my 401k, used half to buy more Bitcoin, half to pay rents, and then the rest is history. So it was not something I'd necessarily recommend, but I was still fairly young and single and didn't have many responsibilities. So it ended up being a pretty good payoff. So that was kind of the starting point of the quote unquote hero's journey, but it could have very easily gone a wrong direction.
And this leads me naturally to my next question, which is, is your sort of interest in, changing the world's financial system rooted in, that the existing financial system deferring that offer that they gave to you and kind of pulling the rug out from under you? Like, is this just payback for, for the big banks,
I think that'll make like a really good HBO series storyline, but I don't think it's that vindictive, I don't think that really was permanently ingrained. Again, in part because I ended up getting so fortunate with that kind of turn of events during that tough time, and got a great job. Frankly, I feel like I skipped a couple of years of my career. So it's less about that and more that I've always been really interested in politics. And I, even like in college and kind of like early 20s, just very disgusted with like just an increasing like caricature of both sides of the political spectrum. So I ended up, I wouldn't call myself a hardcore libertarian, but, in 2011, I actually started looking seriously at gold as an investment. This was around the time of the first debt sequester, which people might not remember the name of that, but basically the result of it was the downgrade of the U.S. debt for the first time ever from AAA to AA by S&P. So around that time, I learned about Bitcoin, and I had the right thesis, but probably the only trade that could have lost money, which is I bought gold, I shorted the Treasury ETF, and I ignored Bitcoin. And if I had just reversed any one of those three, I think I would have been good. But because I'm not a developer, I ended up ignoring Bitcoin and didn't come back to it until a couple of years later. So it was actually kind of rooted in politics. But the reason I ended up really going down the rabbit hole was recognizing that Bitcoin wasn't just like a gold bugs. Let me, wait for the end times and buy a cabin in the woods and try to kind of ride this apocalypse out if the dollar collapses and we have like a Mad Max scenario. That's kind of how I'd always kind of like viewed the gold bug world. I always viewed Bitcoin as very like a much more optimistic life raft, right? Where you're building a digital gold that could potentially be like a digital world reserve, and ultimately is going to be freely accessible to anyone anywhere in the world, right? And once you kind of open that Pandora's box of what like a decentralized currency could do, as I started to go down the rabbit hole, within my first few months in crypto, Vitalik introduced Ethereum at a conference that I was at in Miami, right? So you started to hear about all these crazy experiments and in decentralization and things that could be built way beyond currency. And there was never really a shortage of ideas. So at that point, especially given my age and kind of relatively meager savings at the time, I would just look at like, okay, Mark Andreessen says this, Fred Wilson says this, these other really thoughtful early stage investors are like kind of all in on this. It's safe for me to spend a couple of years here, see how things progress. And if they fizzle out, I don't think, I'll have a bad story to tell if I go back to business school or, I'm trying to explain myself in an interview, like, why'd you do all this weird stuff? Well, some of the smartest people in the world were also excited about it. Didn't pan out. And ultimately, obviously, it was a straight line up. So at least in terms of eyeballs and understanding, not necessarily in terms of the market itself.
Yeah, that's a really it's a really simple, thoughtful way to look at spending time and energy around it. I would say it sort of reflects some of my own, which is something that you point out in your report, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, which is that the types of people and the amount of money that's gone into the industry, it's just been so massive. The person I've done, 100+ interviews of different people in Silicon Valley over the years. And I always said that Naval Ravikant was the smartest person I had ever met. And, when he started talking about, Bitcoin and crypto, like that for me, that was where I was like, here's the person that I've always said is maybe the smartest person I've ever interviewed or most intelligent person I've ever met. And he's talking about it. There must be something to it.
I think Naval's number 2 or 3, but yes, I think Balaji's got him by a nose, but I know they're friends. So I probably just created a fight between the two of them. No, I totally agree. I think, Naval, Balaji Srinivasan, and Vitalik, obviously, I think are three of the most thoughtful, just polymaths, really, that are able to think about and kind of make lateral connections for how this is important, how it can cross the chasm, and ultimately what's going to be the sequence and like order of operations for moving from a state of the world where we have these centralized institutions that have been around for hundreds of years to one that is much more kind of individual centric. And how do you build that in a way that's not dystopian, right? Because that's obviously going to create a tremendous amount of disruption. It's already created disruption just in the small verticals, relatively small verticals that it's impacted, right? You think about e-commerce and, like small mom and pop shops versus Amazon, right? You think about information and like what's happened with the media. I think that's going to happen with basically every sector of the economy, and it's going to include governments, right? In terms of how we actually organize society. So I think this is going to be the most profound shift, not only in our generation and maybe our lifetimes, but maybe for many generations to come. Just if you think about the acceleration of the AI, crypto, all of these like major game-changing technologies that are hitting all at once, biomedicine, et cetera. So I'm excited for the future, but one of the reasons I get excited to kind of build around here isn't just the volatility of the token markets, right? Which is obviously a lot of money has been made and lost, but really how's the future going to be constructed from governments to companies and everything in between.
You mentioned that you first stumbled into Bitcoin in 2013, and it sounds like you made some pretty big bets there. This is a question I think basically anyone that's not in it sort of asks themselves is like, am I too late? And I want to get into your report and some of the things you've written about. But just like, how do you answer that for people that are saying, hey, yeah, that's great for him. He's in 2013. Obviously, there's a huge opportunity for him. But what about people that are, or entrepreneurs or startups that are saying, hey, like, should I bet my next, like you did, should I bet my next 2 or 3 years of my career on building something in this space, or, should I work on something else?
This is something that's not going back in the bottle, right? If you just look at the flood of talent from traditional like big tech and centralized tech platforms to open source communities with all these different kind of building blocks in Web3, it's one direction right now. And even with the market coming back 30, 40%, more than that, 50% from the highs in the last couple months, given what happened with inflation and people being concerned about the Fed cutting rates and whatnot. The amount of capital that's been raised to build the infrastructure and all the new companies in the space, and the talent direction that's coming in, it's I've been doing this full time for 8.5 years, and it's not even close. There's nothing that I've seen on par with this in terms of the pace. And really critically, it's happening in different waves across different segments of the market, right? So at first it was decentralized finance, and then it was like all the layer ones and all the scaling, and then it was NFTs, and then it was DAOs and gaming. And you're starting to see like massive bull rushes into certain sectors, and then others will cool, consolidate, and you'll actually see the products get built, and like the UX improvements and the scalability improvements and whatnot. And while those segments are going through their consolidation phase, the other ones are exploding with hype and excitement and like new entrants. And it used to be that we'd go through these big like 4-year cycles, like boom bust, and a bunch of people would wash out. Now, I think as a kind of micro economy almost, you basically just see rotations into different areas, but the capital is there, the talent is there, and ultimately I think the staying power is there where it hadn't been necessarily in cycles past. Now, it's not to say that everything's a good investment, right? Obviously, there's a lot of garbage out there, and this is the money that's been made is going to attract some scammers and the like. But I think the core is solid, and just the caliber of people that are working full time here is probably the highest talent density sector of tech right now.
Yeah, one of the constant criticisms of Web3 is all the nefarious things that happen in the space. A friend of mine's company was recently, had a cyber attack, and they had to pay out a ransom, via crypto. We see, we saw just this week of somebody that went through an incubator here in Silicon Valley, friends of friends who, were sort of the government found, this missing Bitcoin that had been stolen. But one of the arguments you make in your report is that the same or worse things are happening in the current financial system. And what do you say to people that have this reasoning is a reason not to dive in or to get involved?
Tech is neutral, right? It's the people around it that are ultimately making decisions to build for good or exploit for bad purposes, right? And I think that's true it's true in banking, it's true in social media, it's true in biotech and pharmaceuticals. It's obviously going to be true in like anything that touches Web3. So the thing that it strikes those of us that are kind of living every day in the industry is obvious, but if you're trying to do something on a globally accessible like public ledger that you shouldn't be doing, and you're trying to get away with it, it's incredibly stupid to actually leverage this technology versus something else. Now, we can have a conversation about like zero knowledge proofs and like truly like private cloak transactions and some of the technology that's being built to enhance privacy on blockchains. But in general, it just doesn't really make any sense to leverage this technology because you get caught, right? And I think the important thing here is that most of us, I'll just speak for myself. I think the much greater threat in the coming years is top-down authoritarian threats and government overreach when it comes to civil liberties, when it comes to civil unrest, when it comes to even like war or kind of infighting. And we're always going to have these anecdotes that make the industry look bad because someone, like just the other day, the couple that laundered like $3.6 billion. It's cartoonish, like who this couple was, how they got caught, but they got caught, right? And I think that's good. It's valuable, and it kind of is just yet another proof point that the current legal system works if you have probable cause and you actually are just doing the work to find bad actors. They're going to slip up eventually, and it doesn't matter what technology they use. I would argue, though, that these ledgers make it a hell of a lot easier to audit that after the fact because there are tools that make it easier.
So the Messari report is an annual report that you write on the sort of state of Web3 or the crypto industry. This year's report is 165 pages, I believe. Could you just, for those that aren't familiar with it, it's really incredible. And I'm going to post the link here in the chat so that those that haven't seen it can go download it and reference it. How did the report start, and what is the purpose of it? And then maybe we could dive into some of the things that you talk about in it.
Sure. It started as a tweet thread, a few years ago. I think, January 1st, 2018 was the first one that I did. As the complexity and number of interesting things in the industry has increased, as my team has gotten bigger, and as different sectors have emerged kind of worth coverage in their own right, the report has expanded as well. And it kind of does three things. One, it organizes my mental model for how things are shaping up, and at some point I'm going to hit my limit to be able to even summarize everything that's happening, because it's just getting too big. But it's been a forcing function, thinking through what's the state of the world, where are we going, and kind of how does my company, frankly, fit within it. Two, it highlights all the work that our research team has done, right? So we do have a research subscription product that we sell, and a lot of the links back through the report are tying back to the work that they've done. So it's as much a summary as it is an index for people to go deeper on different topics. And then last but not least, I think it's a 0 to 1 manual almost for people that are new, right? The biggest knock on crypto, or one of the biggest challenges to adoption, is you make a decision to buy Bitcoin and then what, right? There's just an infinite number of interesting things that are happening now, and it's only accelerating because much like the internet, it's open, and you can kind of build off of all these interoperable tools, and nothing's happening in a vacuum, and people are constantly tinkering with how you can put different puzzle pieces together. And so if you're I think the worst thing that could happen for some people that are kind of new to the space is they get in, they understand it, they have some aha moment, whether it's, okay, inflation 7.5%, so I'm gonna need Bitcoin, or I really wanted to get exposure to this asset that's not listed on Coinbase, and I just used Uniswap for the first time and you leveraged Ethereum as a platform, or I'm an NBA fan, and I'm not going to buy a baseball card, but this NFT at Top Shots is really cool, right? There's usually some 0 to 1 moment across all of these use cases. And then you realize that there's this entire universe where you have basically no ability to get started, or no North Star. So the structure of the report is basically, how do you help people, regardless of what their entry point is, whether they've been here for 10 years, whether they're just bought their first Bitcoin, how do you give them a 0 to 1 Bible that is up to date and will not comprehensively cover, but as close to comprehensively cover crypto as a starting point for people that are just getting their feet wet.
You say that you spend about 10% of your time each year working on it. You take a month or more than a month to just kind of crank it out. It seems like brilliant marketing. I'm sure it didn't start as that, just started as a good thing to do, but what kind of ROI do you see on this type of report that doesn't have any sort of, gating on it, or, there's no fees or anything, it's just freely given. It's really incredible. But what type of ROI do you see in the effort that you put in?
I think your question just answered it, right? It's distribution, and it's probably the highest leverage marketing asset that we have. Because for better or for worse, people are kind of conditioned now to expect it. So it boxes me into a corner, and it's kind of daunting. And every future year that, I may or may not want to do it, but I'll continue to do it for as long as it's valuable. And the last, 3 years, we've doubled our newsletter audience as a result of it in the kind of 6-8 weeks after. So just right straight out of the gates, it's basically something that lets us double our audience size in terms of like the sticky subscribers that we have as top of the funnel. And obviously that's from a bigger and bigger base every year. So as long as like that's the math, it makes sense because it's scaling with my time and it's like scaling with us as a company too. But I also think that it's much broader than that, right? Even for the folks that like fall out of our funnel for whatever reason, people know who Messari is, and they we're at least a brand that comes to mind in what's otherwise a very noisy space. So I think that's golden, and obviously it's not something we take for granted as a company, but continuously reinvest in.
Startup Grind has a super global audience. In the report, you talk about the great fall of China's Bitcoin industry. What are you seeing outside of the U.S. that and maybe even as recently as February that people should keep an eye on this year?
Obviously, we're based in the U.S. A good chunk of our customers are in the U.S. So it's easy to kind of fall into the trap that America is number one, or it's like the end all be all. I would say two things to watch. One, India, the fact that they kind of doubled back from a crackdown on crypto, and they seem like the wild card that could be the biggest beneficiary of pro crypto policies. We'll see how that kind of plays out in practice, but it's a highly educated, young, like fast rising democratic country. And if they embrace Web3, especially given how globalized everything is, it could just be transformative for them as a country and as an economy, much like China was for manufacturing, right? So I really think that India is a wild card here and could play a meaningful role in the build out of Web3. Otherwise, though, in the West, like a lot of people are looking to the U.S. just because of how important the dollar is structurally and how integrated our financial system is to the global economy. So I think getting it right in the home front really does have ripple effects in Europe and kind of generally across the more liberal Western economies. And that's why I think all efforts concentrated here right now. The other reason the U.S. is important is we have a federal system where you have a really dynamic tension between the states and the federal government. And so part of the ground game from a policy standpoint and kind of making sure that crypto is kind of widely adopted and supported within the U.S. is you can kind of invest in states as well to push back against federal overreach here. And we're already starting to see some states separate themselves and become like very pro crypto havens, like state of Florida and what Mayor Suarez is doing in Miami is a good example. The mayor of, or the governor of Colorado, very like early supporter of Bitcoin and crypto. Wyoming has been doing a lot that's very DAO friendly, for instance, and banking friendly, trying to create clarity there. And then on the other hand, you have states like New York that has a bit license, right? So and a new mayor that's trying to be pro Bitcoin and kind of push for like some either amendments or ideally like an overturn of what was I think an overreach in financial regulation of the bit license. So I don't want to just gloss over like everywhere else in the world, but I think it's an interesting dynamic because most of like the crypto GDP is in the US. That's where a lot of the investment is. And it's where the lion's share of the policy work and the policy fight is today.
Yeah, there's a line in the report that is great, which is that there's nothing more punk than the battle for American crypto. I mean, I'm in the United States as well, so these examples of of some of these different politicians that you just mentioned, are those things happening in other countries? Like, are there the same kind of like maybe it's not, the upper echelon of the political power, but the sort of next tier or the next tier below that. Are there pockets like that in other Western countries, or you talked about India, but are there people that are like rallying around it in the way that the mayor of New York is, or the mayor of Miami is?
It's very piecemeal, right? I think in the the Middle East, like the UAE has some stated interest and initiatives here. Singapore goes either way on a couple different axes. Portugal is very friendly, trying to basically create a haven in Europe for crypto entrepreneurs. Lisbon's getting very popular. France is kind of the best of times, the worst of times, I guess. In terms of their tax policies, very friendly, but otherwise it's I think at the federal level it could go either way. And then obviously you have different South American countries that are starting to be a little bit more proactive about trying to recruit people. El Salvador being the most obvious, but Colombia and others taking a hard look as well. So it's, again, I have blinders on to a certain extent. There's definitely like interesting international experiments, but you got to win the U.S. because that's where the financial flows are.
Well, one of the largest reasons why Web3, and by the way, we're going to go to questions here in just a few minutes, so please, if you have questions, add them to the questions tab right next to the chat, and we'll go into those directly in just a moment. But one of the largest reasons why Web3 is so different from previous iterations of the web is the ownership component. Why is that so important for users of Web3, that they have an opportunity of ownership? There's been a lot of debate on, like, is the ownership truly different? Is it just sort of like displacing, sort of moving it from one bucket to this bucket instead of actually being truly different than the previous iteration? How do you see that?
I think the best way to think about user ownership is on an other things equal basis, right? So that's my 18-month-old in the background, for those that are hearing screaming. If you have the exact same product, right, the exact same user experience, and the exact same company, and you have a choice between something that is going to pay you and something that is going to make money from you and not pay you, you're going to choose the one that pays you, right? And this sounds like obvious on its face. And so the question is, how do you bootstrap all these products that are going to be inferior in some respects to the centralized alternatives, right? They're going to be slower, or they're not going to have the same liquidity or kind of concentrated network, or it's going to be a little riskier or whatever. Well, the returns in crypto have been what have offset that, right? So like that volatility and that like early ownership in these networks is the bootstrapping mechanism. And a lot of people are going to lose money, and if they're speculating, but I think the people that are ultimately going to win in this next phase of adoption are going to be like the early users that are just in the trenches, like stress testing these things, actually contributing, feedback, and potentially even becoming like active, quasi-volunteer, quasi-part-time community members that are helping scaling these communities and kind of the underlying products. And ultimately, more and more people are going to be excited to get paid to tinker, right, or to get paid to use a certain product. And I think I can only speak from personal experience. I've been around for a while in this industry, right? I invested early in Bitcoin, and those investments have obviously done pretty well. It doesn't matter like how much the reward is, but like when I see I have two options, I can use this product that doesn't give me anything, or I can use this product that is going to like pay me, and I'm going to have like some lottery ticket upside. I'm going to use that one, right? I want to collect the lottery tickets and then, turn around in 5 years and see which ones just, basically became like a life-changing amount of money because I was just one of the early contributors. Contributors, like in air quotes, I think in Web 2 or thinking about traditional companies, stakeholders. Well, they're not really stakeholders; they're customers. They're paying you, and then they get nothing in return outside of the explicit like transaction. Web3 is a little bit different. People more bought in.
Yeah, I've often thought over the years as I've used different technology products, like, one of these examples is SendGrid, which I've used for, I don't know, 12 or 13 years, it feels like. If I had put that money that I invested in the product into their stock, I would have been so much more better off, honestly. Or if I could have participated in some way as an early customer and believer in them, in the stock, there was a lot of upside there, and we were, putting our money where our mouth was with their products, and still do that with lots of other companies. You in the fall last year, you raised $21 million for Messari, and I wonder if you could share, maybe the best thing that's come from raising the money, and maybe one of the worst, one of the biggest positives and one of the biggest negatives from raising money. I think a lot of times, when you raise funding or you see people raising funding, it's just like you see all the good, and you don't really see any of the bad. So I wonder if you would be willing to share something that's been really positive about it and something that's been tough.
I mean, the positives are, it gives you a nice cash buffer, and I think it's an important. We've run the business default to live, right? Basically since day one, right? So we started in 2018. We've collectively raised 27 million in total, and we've got more than that on the balance sheet, right? So having said that, going from 5 to 12 to 20 to 30 to now almost 80 employees, especially in like the volatile end market that we're in, you don't want to have like that buffer become like a smaller and smaller percentage over time, right? So you kind of have to like think about the not just like, are we running at break even, but like what is our like cost of operations look like in relation to our cash stack, right? So that is something that allows you to kind of operate more aggressively and continue to focus on growth, particularly in this industry where there is so much kind of end market volatility, and you have to be a little bit more thoughtful about that in the budgeting process. In terms of negatives, I mean, there's probably really only one selfish one that I think has a silver lining, which is you obviously get diluted down, and it's slightly less control for like me as the founder, for instance. But at the same time, like the stakes are getting higher, and as long as you have a good board, which I think we do, and you pick the people that you're like doing business with well, then it's like I'm scaling along with like the other folks that are around the table, and you get into like an iron sharpens iron dynamic instead of something that's okay. Well, now I have a boss. Like this was fun when I was just the solo founder without any investors, beholden to nobody, like king of the castle. And I think a lot of founders are kind of, we set off on this like crazy dangerous journey. Maybe it's not as dangerous anymore, but like it's certainly at the onset, like it's this dangerous, risky journey. Like friends might misunderstand, family, and we're betting on ourselves, so we don't want to lose the ability to make that long-term bet, right? And I think where I've kind of my mind has changed a little bit is I've gotten less focused on that explicit control over time. One, because I think I'm a better operator than I was 10 years ago when I started as an entrepreneur. Two, because I have a good relationship with my board and we're performing well. But three, I think it's also like a really good, healthy check on alignment with the rest of the the team that I have, right? Like now you have to have equity and you have to have incentives baked in for your broader team versus just like mercenary contributors. And because I have a board and like investors that I'm also have a fiduciary obligation to, it kind of tightens the obligations to the rest of the folks on the team too. So there's good alignment there. And I think that's something that like people don't really talk about too much. It's like, oh, now I serve at the pleasure of the board, or there are now these kind of checks on my power, right? But in reality, what it is, it's probably a good check on the entire team's alignment. So you don't just have someone that has outsized control, and it can devolve into a tyranny, and you might not even realize it.
Awesome. Ryan, thank you so much for being here. We're gonna jump to Q&A and start taking questions from the audience. Finn, you want to fire off first question?
Yeah, brilliant, Ryan. Super insightful. Thank you so much for your time. We've got time just for a couple of questions. I'll fire off here one of the questions from Alberto Sanchez. And again, given that people are very keen to get as much information as possible, Alberto asks, hey, Ryan, any books or good reads you would recommend when it comes to better understanding cryptocurrency, NFTs, blockchain?
I would definitely read Ray Dalio's new book on the rise and fall of nations. The very first chapter of the theses, the first page, is just about the decline in trust in our modern institutions. And I gave kind of like a one-page summary. His book came out like a week later, and it is a really kind of brilliant breakdown. It's scary, but it's, I think, a pretty brilliant breakdown for where we could be heading from just a social and political level. And I think that, as much as anything, really makes a good case for why these technologies are important as maybe a fix or an optimistic bet on how the future could go, and how we could right the ship, particularly in the US and kind of Western democracies. But if not, right, like what are your options, and like what are your alternatives? Like it's also it's an exit vote, it's a life raft at the same time, and so I think those of us that have even a more pessimistic view on where things are heading, it's still an optimistic bet on the long term, even if the medium term ends up being a little bit of a rocky mess.
So, I mean, one of the things I think in the crypto space has been around security, and Mark here asks, hey, Ryan, I was wondering, how do you approach security when tying into digital wallets? And my partner and I, they're bringing out their MVP, and they have real questions on how to make players feel solid with their transactions and game with compliance in mind. So really a question around, security. And then, of course, if you're coming out, if you're a founder, a startup developing a product, how to remain as compliant as possible.
Well, I think if you're worried about compliance and everything, and you're actually managing people's funds, right, you're going to spend a lot more money than I'm going to give an answer for in 30 seconds as to like how to get that right from both a compliance and product and security standpoint. But I think from a design standpoint, having non-custodial products that are connected to like end user hardware wallets is probably the standard, and what I think most people are most comfortable with. The Coinbases of the world, or Fireblocks, BitGo, the big exchanges, big custodians that have been around for a while, I think are going to be extremely difficult to displace, because the longer they haven't been compromised, the more trust there is, right? So versus like making a leap of faith on some kind of up and coming hardware wallet or infrastructure. So I like a combination of secure physical hardware and like open source frameworks for the wallets themselves, because it's a hell of a lot harder to hack than if you just had like a MetaMask browser wallet, or your own homegrown wallet solution.
Brilliant. Hey, Luke here says, hey, Ryan, I love the report. Question: the global privacy landscape is an ever-changing and evolving space. What, if any, advancements need to be implemented in Web3 to, again, remain kind of compliant, but on a global standard? That was asked by Luke.
Yeah, I think privacy is tricky from a regulatory standpoint. It's a difficult conversation to have on the regulatory standpoint because they always go to like national security and, think about all the bad people that you're helping if you can't surveil these transactions. And I mentioned this when we were starting the conversation, but the U.S. government just found the couple that laundered $3.6 billion during the infamous Bitfinex hack from a few years ago. So it is possible to like find people and track them down. And quite frankly, it's in order to use this technology at scale, you need privacy solutions, right? But it needs to be opt-in and opt-out privacy. So you need to basically be able to give regulators view keys, or you need to be able to, help customers kind of manage who they share this public ledger access to for different reasons, right? So you wouldn't want to have the metadata from your crypto secured health record on a public blockchain available for anyone to like inspect, or even like reverse engineer, kind of track and tie to your identity. But you might want to permission access to that and like prove that you own that record and be able to like, selectively disclose it to a new doctor, or, if you go to the hospital or whatever, right? So you need a way to kind of manage those two. And I think the same is true for financial services. There's big financial companies that will not use public blockchains until there are better privacy guarantees, because they're not going to put their customers' data on chain and subject them to like any kind of reverse engineering transactions, or figuring out through just data analytics how certain transactions are mapping. It's a non-starter for a lot of big entity use cases. So I think what we'll ultimately see, and again, this is like really a tricky thing from educating policymakers. You're going to see some combination of like centralized, like you'll regulate the edges, and you'll have like some visibility in terms of the customers that are providing custodial services. And most people will opt for custodial services because it's more convenient, it's more secure. They trust themselves more than they trust a third-party specialist more than they trust themselves. The same way, I'm sure most people on this call don't keep $100,000 under their mattress, right? That's going to go in the bank. And you trust that there are going to be some centralized institutions that are credible, and you're going to be able to get that money back, right? That's like the basic social contract that we have with like private enterprises versus you just having everything ourselves. But crypto gives you the option, and it should give you the option. And I think that the people that are going to stay private are, I think that's a perfectly legitimate concern to have, and thing to preserve and fight for. It does create some headline risks though. So navigating that and helping to really understand what the trade-offs are, and like how do we mitigate malicious actors' ability to use this tech the same as someone that's got the best of intentions, I think is important. But you have to be able to preserve it, because in Nigeria, protesters are using crypto to raise money, right? In some of the folks in Ukraine that are kind of mobilizing for the threat on their border, like they are using crypto to fundraise. So this is not just like North Korea is going to use this to fund their nuclear ambitions. I hope that doesn't happen. Obviously, we hope to keep things like that as a minimum, and create safeguards that can make that more difficult than it is maybe in the early stages. But that's kind of part of the trade-offs. And I go back to my earlier point where the future where everything looks like the Chinese Communist Party's decentralized currency that is basically state-run, monitored, and ultimately, you can get unplugged from the matrix like a Black Mirror episode. That is 100 times more dangerous, I think, than what any individual could do, even the worst, most vile people in the world. And that has kind of been borne out if you just look at history in terms of what governments versus people can do.
Well, let's take one more question, if that's okay with you. and moving more in terms of like one of the utilities of blockchain technology in a way has been NFTs, so non-fungible tokens. And we have here a guru, apologies if I'm mispronouncing your name, who says, for a new artist, what should be the best way to kind of sell his creations using, different NFT platforms? Traditionally, the artist who paints using a paint and a brush and a canvas, the painting can be scanned, and then NFTs can be created. But, so it's really that intersection between almost all technology, right? Paint and brush as an artist and new technologies, and how can you kind of really leverage that, utilizing things like NFTs?
With NFTs, first, it's important to talk about art and these profile pictures and some of the more visual elements of NFTs is just the first application. NFTs are simply a data wrapper, right? So you can pack any data and kind of point to any data source by wrapping a link or some modular piece of art or record of data using one of the NFT standards, and then you can kind of transport that and make it interoperable across anything that kind of leverages the Ethereum virtual machine, for instance. So digital art is what's gotten everybody's attention. I think it's exciting, and I go into this in the report, but the digital art market right now is about 0.1% of where the physical art market is in terms of market cap. And that's even with the kind of recent run up. This is actually where Bitcoin was in 2013 versus gold. So if you look at it through that lens, Bitcoin went up 100x in market cap since 2013. And it's now about 10% of gold. If digital art follows the same trajectory, it could still go up 100x in value in terms of the cumulative art that's created and kind of the size of that market. But it will still, be just a fraction of what the physical art market is. So again, that's just art, but there's all sorts of other interesting applications for NFTs. And I actually think one of the most exciting is, NFTs as online credentials or things that you selectively disclose as like part of your identity or part of your reputation. Right now, you can do that with like a profile picture as like I identify with this tribe. But in the future, you should be able to basically get that for any kind of social action. What's cool about this is it's less dystopian than like a centralized social credit score, right? Because at least it gives the user the ability to kind of share selectively which of these badges they have or which of these NFTs they have. And then you could have multiple services create scores or different types of credential, like meta credentials that sit on top of that for different purposes. So I think that the applications for identity in particular are pretty much endless with NFTs, and we're that's probably the area that we're still kind of earliest in discovery, but it might have the most profound impact if we look at 10, 15 years.
And there you go. There's an opportunity for anyone, if ever we've heard one. Ryan, thank you so much for your time. Thank you all for attending our first session. We'll be back soon with our panel. Stay tuned. Thank you once again. Take care.